The guy from Texas, fun. That's a priority in the Gigabit City. Just watching as the last folks check in there in the back of the room, and we'll get started. Okay, so my name is Craig Bachmann. I'm the Senior Director of the Open Digital and Internet of Everything program for the TM Forum. The TM Forum's a 26-year-old nonprofit that has been working on best practices and collaborative approaches to digital services with over 1,000 companies and organizations and some 150,000 people using the collaborative output of all of these projects. And so we are very proud and pleased to be partners with the Smart City Council on all this work, and we'll move from there. So let me go through. Now, big apologies are in order for Anne, and you can't see her name card, but we'll keep going. So Anne, hey, I'd like each of you to introduce yourself and maybe 2 minutes on what it is you do for a living.
Sure. Let's see. There we go. Yep. So my name is Anne Schwieger. I work for the City of Boston Department of Innovation and Technology. I am what we call the Broadband and Digital Equity Advocate for the city. It's a new position that was created last year, so I've been in the role since December. And it's basically what it sounds like. We want broadband to be better for everyone in Boston. We want everyone to have access to it, not just in theory, but to actually be able to afford it. So we're really, through this role, looking at broadband as an ecosystem and, both in the short term and long term, looking at how we can evolve it in a way that is good for everyone.
Great. Thanks for having me here. I'm John Gordon. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the current business within General Electric. I've spent a lot of years working in the smart city space, having helped start IBM's business a long time ago. The thesis that I'm really focused on now is how to change the whole smart city initiative from being projects that companies and technologists do with City Hall for the benefit of people to creating environments, as you said, Craig, that actually become inclusive and sustainable and help the city and the people in the city help themselves. And so I think there's a new type of model for us to approach, and the Gigabit Cities will be where it takes place.
Hello everyone, my name is Debra and I'm the Chief of Innovation and Performance for the City of Pittsburgh. Our mission is to make Pittsburgh a world-class city through the intersection of technology, sustainability, and performance. And one of our core missions that we have around smart cities is that if it's not for all, it's not for us.
And I'm Hugh Miller. I'm the Chief Information and Technology Officer for the City of San Antonio, and I oversee, we're centralized technology, so I oversee technology direction and support, deployment, et cetera, for all departments throughout the city, which includes the fiber network we have scattered throughout the city that builds a foundation for us to lay a lot of the kind of smarter technologies on top of. So that's one of the little pieces for it.
Great, thanks you. So let's just get started let's dive into the notion of Gigabit City. You can trot out a definition or something, but at the end of the day, is it still more of a vision than a plan, or do you think it's become more of a plan that people are grappling with? Or is it the vision that you use, or is it both?
Well, for us, it's in action. I think for a gigabit community, I mean, initially you actually have to have some direction towards some type of gigabit broadband technology, and so we've been laying fiber for city services for quite a while. This was something we started working in the city 12 years ago, so about 11 years ago we started laying for ourselves. So more recently, we're one of the cities that Google Fiber chose to lay fiber out throughout the citizens area. So in Texas, I can't service the citizens, and so we open up the avenues and we control the right-of-way to help carriers come in and provide that service. So For us, it's one of the things that we're working on now to actually drive what does that ultimately mean for the communities to have gigabit services at an affordable rate. So and with Ann down the road here, broadband is a critical utility that is the same as power or water. If you don't have it, you're not going to advance families, communities, et cetera, individuals in literacy and business literacy and digital literacy and advancing their lives through their careers and the things that they are able to educate themselves with. So our big focus is to deploy that, open up avenues, bring in businesses that are going to be focused on delivering gig services, and then open the doors for some of these future things that are going to help communities all over, like remote education, remote medicine and medical services, and multiple things that will open up avenues that you can transport video in a much cleaner way than you did with some of the standard broadband speeds we've had to deal with today.
Yeah, I very much agree with you. We in Pittsburgh really think that it's just like another public good infrastructure. So similar to running water, electricity, everyone deserves free, fast public Wi-Fi as part of its infrastructure. And what we've been really thinking about it is the application of it. So one of the most recent Pew studies show that the percentage across demographics, across socioeconomic classes, the percentage of Americans that have access to a hardware, whether it's your smartphone or your smart tablet, is actually in the high 90s. It's a pretty high percentage. The difference and the discrepancy when we talk about the digital divide is the data plan. Many of the lower socioeconomic classes do not have access to a reliable data plan, the way that you and I might have in terms of, because of our credit history, because, of our home ownership, etc. They rely on, a pretty sporadic data plan. And once you have that, that means you're more likely to use your data plan on your smartphone versus our homes that, have a really reliable fast broadband, and you're not likely able to do what you need in terms of workforce development or training on your smartphone, such as writing a resume. So we are really trying to work on forging that gap in terms of creating that data plan.
Yeah, so one thing that we also very much agree that as it exists in our life, broadband functions as a utility. It is not regulated as a utility, and we do not, as a city government, have a great deal of authority to dictate the terms of build-out and rates. So we, for that reason, have decided in Boston that the way we get to fast, affordable, and reliable for all businesses and constituents is to put in place new or streamlined policies and processes that we think will enable private investment in broadband infrastructure. So, overnight, that is absolutely, not going to suddenly lead to 140,000 people in Boston who have not subscribed to broadband in the home magically being able to afford it. But that is one of the tools that we are, using right now, is looking internally to say, well, there are a lot of reasons why we have in American cities a monopoly situation, but we have a certain amount of responsibility, and there are things that we can control as cities that can change that.
I think all those are great examples from my colleagues here on where it is today, Craig, where Gigabit cities are. These are great areas of people trying to get more access, more data, bridge the divide, and as Debra said, make it something for all, right? Not just for some. I think that it's a good view where we are. Let me get the other side of your question. Where's the vision for it, right? So for me, I think a lot beyond just how do we get people connected to how do cities take what Debra said as infrastructure and actually push it to what's the infrastructure in the digital age, right? I think it's more than getting connected to Wi-Fi or getting or having access. That's an important element of what we drive. But what I think the power of our cities is it's a great place to actually bring together a lot of different points of view, create creativity, and if you can unleash the people in the city to solve the problems instead of giving a solution to the problem, there's a lot more benefit that can be had from that. That's why, personally, I think that's why cities have always thrived. Right? They become a source of a critical mass of human thought, innovation, and creativity. So the area that I see this infrastructure expanding into as we get to these gigabit cities actually goes to the types of data we let other people use to move forward. And so one thing that we try to think about in this IoT world is what is the new type of data? Data as an infrastructure. Data is a type of infrastructure that you provide to people to help them solve problems. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about if you can pull information that you can see, hear, feel, smell. We thought about tasting, and that got really awkward. But if you start to pull that kind of information and say, look, we're going to give this to people in the city. Where are people? Where are cars? Where are crowds? Where are noise levels? And let them use that to do simple things like, what's the quietest way to walk home when you're talking with your wife on the way home after you've been in traffic, right? That's not a type of solution that you need City Hall to solve for you, but you can't solve that problem if cities don't put in the type of infrastructure to enable you to do that, right? So I think about today, we think a lot about gigabit as connectivity and how do you get in. I think the promise of it is how do we use that infrastructure to actually create new insight about the city that allows all of you, right, the people in our cities to solve more problems.
Yeah, it's interesting. Really good points. I was in a conference in China City 2-3 weeks ago. Somebody very clever put up a Maslow's hierarchy of, at the bottom now is broadband, and you work your way up from there. And I was wondering how long it will be until somebody puts data as part of the necessary layer of the life cycle here. So I think the inevitable question after everyone talks about this, on one side there's the digital divide pieces and where can you go with this? But how do people respond to what is essentially at its core a technical vision? Does this throw everybody off? I mean, is gigabit, and I'll give you a brief story of why I'm asking the question. So I live in very rural Colorado, very rural. And the local electric co-op has decided to roll out essentially fiber to the barn. And it's going to be a gate to each barn in the area. It's about 1,500 people, mostly good farms. Many more animals, for sure. So the idea wasn't, that there's a whole bunch of folks sitting around the smartphones, all but to take that gigabit capability, what were they going to do with it? There was a lot of that kicking around. It took a long time to get the citizens engaged in, well, what does a gigabit really buy you anyway? Right? What does that mean? And then, once they started getting these stories about, well, you can now fly drones and collect information on your lost cattle, and on, the precision ag type of thing. And it was it was almost a 2-year process to get folks that were really not in sync with the vision and what that really means to the average citizen. So have each of you gone through the same kind of engaging the citizens and trying to explain what gigabit technology will do for you?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's going to be an expectation. I mean, just as if you turn on your lights and the lights come on. I mean, it's going to be the same expectation. The things that are going to drive on top of it are endless, and I think that's one of the beautiful things. Is relatively speaking, there are very, very few gigabit cities today, and so with that, you have a team of people that are in those areas trying to be creative on the things that they can do. But at the end of the day, for me, today's benefit is a very parallel driving type of solution. I can run several things at the same time on top of it. But what that also means is there are places where businesses want to function in a modern day format and they don't have enough bandwidth to be able to do their point of sale system. Of which many people don't want to run many things on site anymore because it doesn't make sense. So the bandwidth necessary to do the things that people want to do as we move forward, whether you're rural or whether you're in the urban environment, is going to be continually demanding on broadband. And the future things are pretty impressive, right? So, well, the first thing I see us laying on it is high-end video. We're doing a huge amount of video through the city, but I see it interactive. To John's point, I agree that there's a huge volume of things that are in the future based on information. The first part of that is figuring out how do you do that investment and what is the value of that investment and what is the expectation from the citizens. And to your point also, I think it's very important. There's only so much that the city can do to solve community problems, and I think that the community itself has to be a part of that solution, whether it's business investors or people just getting involved to be a part of it. And I think as we progress forward, if we can build things that become more intuitive for a citizen to be able to engage themselves into government, they won't reluctantly consume our services, they'll willingly be a part of the services. And I think all of this stuff, if you lay down smarter government, infuse gigabit type of communities, these now open doors for us. We've had restrictions historically that we haven't been able to jump over, and that expectation is going to be, the generations coming up, that's what they've grown up with. Their technology has been with them since they were born. So their expectation of where we need to go is so far than where we are today, and that's really what we're enabling.
Do we have the capacity that we need right now to run, the great ideas we're talking about? That's something I'm sort of interested in hearing from other panelists. You can do this as well.
Great. I think that's figuring out where's the opportunity is really important. What's the outcome of this, right? So we can explain gigabit or any other technology, but many technologies have died on their way to being successful by trying to talk about the technology behind them. I think what almost opens up more is what Hugh and Ann just pushed on, is how do we go and engage the community in the right way to solve problems? So I'm a new Boston resident, so I met with Dan O'Brien at the Boston Area Research Initiative. So we had this great debate. The debate was about what's better, doing things like hackathons or doing things like directed grants, right, to actually have a challenge. And we came up with this really interesting model after many cups of coffee to say, if cities have a set of agendas, a set of problems that they want to solve, you simply unaffordable to solve every problem that you'd like to. Right? There's only so many resources. But the people in the city collectively drive a lot of resources. And so when you get to say, we're going to, here's our challenge. We want to go challenge the city, challenge the university students, challenge people around to solve this problem, and create the infrastructure, make the data available to solve the problem. You get a couple things. The people in your city get really practical skills that are relevant for the next era of technology innovation, right, for IoT, because they start to solve real problems that way. You get your agenda advanced without having to go procure individual solutions. So you partner with a bunch of universities around and make a competition out of it. And then the city has an opportunity to do things like take space in the city, take land, take areas that they need to redevelop, and say, look, we'll take the successful person who solved that, we'll implement it to be your reference case in our city, and we'll give you space for a year to turn into a company you can export from our city, right? So, which now drives GDP of the area, creates new opportunities. So you've made this whole virtuous cycle that flips the entire model on its head, from saying a city has to go procure everything to the city's creating an environment that fosters this.
So more like crowdsourced or advanced crowdsourced?
Yeah, I think so, but I think the model it's deeper than that, right? It's that because if you think about how to solve some of these other issues, you need more information than you have. I sit on board for a group called Grand Central Technology in Manhattan that does urban tech growth companies. And great company that's in that group called Transit Screen, right? They show you how to move around Manhattan and get to places. A lot of the data that they show today has schedule data in it, right? When's the subway supposed to be there? Well, that's useful, right? It's better than not knowing it, but if they can't run around as a startup company and actually put sensors and infrastructure around the city, it's way too hard. Cities can, right? Cities can say, look, I put the infrastructure there. I can't solve all your problems, but if I put it there, you can make that perfect. You can make it so you can walk anywhere in the city, you know exactly when the next area is coming. So that's I think the mission. And if you drive it all the way into the economic model of encouraging them to make successful businesses in your city, you're going to spiral the opportunity.
So, not to but is there a gigabit economy evolved, or has evolved, or is it still to come that people think of this?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I like to steer away from this being a technical vision, because I really don't think, because if we think of it as just a technical vision, we limit it to just technology being able to solve the challenges that John and others have addressed. And what we really want to base it on, again, is that this is a public good infrastructure that's necessary, that doesn't rely just on the CIO needing to, spearhead this within the city, but it's something that's a collective good that needs to be owned and operated beyond the city in terms of the partners. Because the infrastructure itself, not only in terms of the capital costs, but the maintenance and ongoing operations, especially as technology in the local context changes, means that you need a collection of stakeholders to own and keep the evolving good that's ultimately to benefit society. The second thing is, sort of what John alluded, is that there is a new movement of a number of different programs and initiatives, from Metro Lab Network to some of the 1776 Urban Innovation Council to some of the work that we've been doing with startups called PGH Lab, that is really used to tap onto the digital infrastructure. So the application. So once you have this, how do you apply it to serve whatever the challenge is? And that's really great. But to get to your point is, once you have, the programs or initiatives that tap onto the infrastructure and address some of the challenges, how do you move it towards quality of life, meaning the economy, economic good? And how does that actually translate? And that gets to the heart of the question. Why do we care about this? Why do we move forward with this? We take it on two levels. On the most basic, fundamental level is just actually a story that I had. I was trying to buy a hot dog from a food truck a few weeks ago, right? And this was just a bunch of little food trucks that are happening throughout the city. I did not have cash because I never carry cash, and but I wanted to buy this hot dog, and the vendor wouldn't accept credit card. And the reason why he wouldn't accept credit card is because he had the Square on his phone, but it wasn't going fast enough for him. So he actually chose not to use it. And so it was just, the technology was there, but the infrastructure wasn't there. So as a result, he probably lost out on a lot of customers like me who didn't have cash to do it. And that's just the basic, really low, just a food truck being able to accept credit card on the technology and on the broadband. And then from the higher levels, what we're talking about is a new workforce development. How do we get, a new skill set to be able to be part of this new digital age, right? And so what we're seeing is we started putting Wi-Fi in all our parks and recreation centers, right? Really small. But when we started monitoring this, we saw that actually there wasn't a lot of usage. People weren't using the Wi-Fi. So that gets into, once we thought we put the Wi-Fi in, everything would be solved, all our problems would be done. But ultimately, the usage rates were really, really low at the end of the day. And so we were trying to figure out why, and it was something that we need to add on to the training. So, once Wi-Fi is in place, we needed to put some mobile laboratories in terms of how do you actually use the Wi-Fi, what kind of jobs that you can search for. Can we put some coding academies in so people can learn to code or et cetera? Like, how do you couple that with a new workforce development to take advantage of the infrastructure? So, those are the different levels that we're trying to grapple with. But it gets fundamentally to your question is, what does it mean to be a gigabit city?
Yeah, because I think as you get exposed to an awful lot of this, it does come back to the people at the end of the day. And how do you become a gigabit worker? How do you become a stakeholder ecosystem manager? These are not job titles that we're on something you could put on your resume before, and yet these are the type of almost job titles that are coming up now. How do you manage this ecosystem type of thing? And these are complex. These are multi-dimensional things. People were not set up to do this really to date. And I really admire the work that all of you are doing, because you're crashing through this and getting there. But back to, how do you create the gigabit worker?
Well, because if you think about it, so for San Antonio, we have 14,000 employees, about 8,000 to 9,000 of them are knowledge workers. I supply for that business side a gig pipe to the internet. So it's interesting to think about that, where we're dropping gig speeds into the home, right? And one of the big hurdles I feel like we deal with in the nation today is the volume of people who reside on our highways and our roads to get to work early in the morning and the afternoon. It seems like a huge waste of energy and time, of which is a perpetual cycle we've lived in. And also our buildings that we drive to, they're the most expensive piece of business that we manage. So one of the things that we're looking at is, how does this now open up? If we have this spread out through the community and it's available to people's usage, how can we open up the avenues for people to spend more time doing services at their house? If their house is capable and they have the type of work ethic to be able to do it, and that's also available on the community side for people who want to work as their own business. I mean, just like your farmers who now have fiber to their farm, I mean, the opportunity for them to actually run a business that they never had before is grand. And so with that type of speed, I can run my voice components without any interruptions. I can run face-to-face video and multiple face-to-video to one-face video services without any issues. I can download and do the things that I need straight from my house. That opens up an avenue for people to not have to spend as much time on the road. They have the ability to start small businesses and grow them into bigger businesses straight from their house. And those avenues are great. I mean, our average in the US, I think, is somewhere around 25 megabits per second to the house. I ramp that up by, 40 times? That changes a huge amount of things for my opportunities to do the things that I've been trying to do but not be able to do. And that also transitions to the same pipe that I'm able to, after work, be able to enjoy more entertainment or other things that I need to, education, et cetera, for my kids and my family to be able to enjoy. And at some point, it's going to change the economy. It changes very different things that people need to get ahead of. Because if you look at the music industry, instead of embracing MP3s, they fought them and spent millions of dollars fighting it, and then iTunes pops up and makes billions of dollars doing what they could have done. The video industry is the same way. So I think it's one of these things that it's going to give the avenue to people to be able to do things that will change the economy, and it's figuring out how do you get in front of that, embrace it, make it powerful enough for you to be able to generate some type of revenue from it. And to your point, there's going to be different jobs that this actually develops, and it's now trying to get in front of that as there's going to be, a handful of cities being able to have it, and then it's going to be the expectation for everybody.
This is really awesome. Both Debra and what you just shared really resonates with me and what we're working on in Boston. The skills piece, and I think beyond skills, I think we need to think of it as a literacy. Quick show of hands, who here in this room feels as though they've learned everything they ever need to know about how to use the technology that is available to you in your jobs or life, or that you'll ever need to know, 5 years from now?
I see three.
3 hands. Okay. So think about starting.
Get there first.
Okay. So imagine if your starting point is that you've never used a computer, you don't have an email address. So that was all of us at some point in time. There are community members who are at that point and could really benefit from a training program in Boston called Tech Goes Home, to which the city gives $1 million a year, primarily through revenue we get through cable franchise fees. But then there's also, a lot of young people who don't need 15 hours of training, but need perhaps more specialized opportunities to develop, ability to code in a new language, to, gain some basic like Adobe Illustrator skills. So in Boston, we're trying to figure out, we've here to present had a really good track record partnering with Tech Goes Home. They reach about 3,500 people a year, and they work on skills, just correcting myself, literacy, devices, and then support people in connecting to high-speed internet at home. But we are taking a close look at what else we really should be doing. The 140,000 people who aren't connected in the home is absolutely not a monolith. We know from Pew and ACS data that this population does have some things in common. They tend to be lower income individuals, sometimes with lower levels of educational attainment, but their skill level does not all start from zero. They may be more skilled than us in some specific applications. So we are trying to figure out how do we work with partners like GE, how do we work with the Private Industry Council in Boston, which is our big workforce endeavor, to really get more targeted in how we develop this pipeline of talent that we'll need to actually have a gig economy that, to borrow from one of the earlier speakers, is about inclusive innovation. Real quick point about speed. Maybe another show of hands. Who here is actually getting what they pay for when we're talking about broadband speed at home?
Or do you know?
Or do you know? Oh, okay, so that's great. 2 hands in the back. All right, excellent. So right now we define broadband, the FCC defines broadband in the US as a 25 down. That's, decent if that's what you're getting. But once you start getting above that speed level in most American cities, a gig is not available and won't be available in the very near term. So if you can't afford what we understand to be the basic speed you need to do video enriched learning for a K-12 kid or for an adult learner, I consider myself an adult learner. I use video all the time to figure out how to do things. It's a non-starter. So we also need, in the space of affordable high-speed internet offerings, and they're called high-speed internet because they don't actually meet what we understand broadband to be, how do we get some competition in that market so that when we get to scale with rolling out lifeline modernization, we don't have this ongoing struggle of, not even a two-tiered, like a multi-tiered internet ecosystem where, once you reach your data cap, you're throttling down to like dial-up speed. So if we're thinking about what it takes to address the homework gap, it's absolutely more than 3 gigs a month.
I think that's really interesting point for the access side. And this is, again, all about, the shift's all about inclusiveness. How do we get everyone involved? You asked about skills too, workforce development. So the technology side's an obvious one to find, right? So, and a lot of us do this. If you're in my house, you code for your allowance. So, sorry for my kids. But, so I think if you could say this was 1992 and you knew the dot-com age was coming, would you have learned HTML if you had even the slightest inclination to be technical, right? You probably would. That would be great. And I think where we are in this IoT age now, you're starting to be at that point. So there's a whole class of things we can find for people who are interested in technology as cities to create the infrastructure to allow them to learn and move forward. So let's table that because I think that's the obvious one. I think what's more interesting is what about everybody else, right? Everybody else is not, we're not going to have 100% of people into technology. So how can the fact that we have digital cities and gigabit cities help them, not only in the way they access the type of learning, like you had a great example of how you're doing homework at home, doing that, but actually, and how you should think about the problems for it, right? If you in a history class or some type of civics type class, start to look at, what if you knew this was how pollution is spread through the city? How would you think about that? What are the implications on that for architecture and for design and for traffic flows and everything. What if you had that data? You only can see that picture of the world if you're in a digital city. Otherwise, it's invisible, right? You have no way to see it. So instead of saying this is only about the technology, what I think, and to Debra's point, right, it's not about technology. I like to think about how can you challenge people with the types of questions they should be asking about their world, actually be asking them to think through problems differently, so fundamentally they're educated differently, right? We Google everything and don't pull up a dictionary. When's the last time you flipped open the pages of the dictionary for something? You just don't do it. So the methods of how you solve problems change. I think the methods of how you attack problems will be different in a gigabit IoT industry than they would have before. And so as much as I spend a lot of personal time on the technical side, I'd like to think about how does this have implications for everybody else and how they engage with the world.
Yeah, I have to say, oh, go ahead.
Oh, what, John, as you were speaking, the word false scarcity just came to mind. So if we actually have...
Does that mean there's already too many of me?
No. Definitely not.
No,
So, never enough Johns. So, if we, I think that also like having gigabit speed that allows us to try new things in how we utilize our shared public right-of-way, which I think Debra alluded to, like the importance of like this very important co-owned space that we're all responsible for stewarding in a way that is respectful of all community members. In order to be able to try things and be nimble and to maybe fail sometimes, we need a lot more capacity than we have now to accommodate all manner of sensors, Wi-Fi enabled streetlights. So I think one of the concerns I have, and I think there's a panel that may address this at 2:45, which I'm eager to attend, is, could this underlying transmission layer that we need to transmit all of the bits that will be generated, could there at some point be, a situation that we're in right now where there's a monopoly and not every player could be playing in the public right-of-way solutions that solve problems that impact people's space, just can't afford. And then we're back where we started with, pretty boring things.
Yeah, actually, we'll be talking with the telco folks on this section, which is, I think, the 2:45.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing that. I do have to do a shout out to GE because during the Olympics, you ran this advertisement that said GE was a digital and industry company. And I received so many, from people who were really not familiar with the whole thing. What are they talking about? But it sounds exciting. Can you tell me a little bit about it? I assume you know what I'm talking about.
I do, yeah. I've seen what was there was one named Digital or something like that, right? So let's take the concept back, right? I think what's interesting about the concept, for GE, you're as an industrial infrastructure company, driving power and transportation and all kinds of energy and water system. In the new world, much like cities, right, produce as a core the infrastructure in which we all live. That world's changing, right? It's fundamentally changing to say you don't just build big, physical, heavy-duty things that have to last forever, right? We have to be able to maintain them well and keep them in service and drive them. But you have to actually start thinking about how they generate and produce and drive information. So what's very interesting about the conversations and how I'm sort of pushing this thesis right now with GE is GE's oldest business is lighting, right? 130 some odd years old, right? So to me, the future opportunity says that where there are light posts, as we start to roll out gigabit cities, they're actually the most connected, pervasive sources of power, right? Forget about anything else. Sources of power in any city. You could find other sensors, you put sensors in a million other places, but if you put enough of the right ones on light posts, right, which traditionally had just been there to light something, right, but actually said, look, it's there to provide information the right way, and how do you think about that? You fundamentally changed what it is. And what's interesting, having worked in technology groups, right, to think about the infrastructure of a city. You mentioned putting something up that you have to maintain and keep track of for years, and that it has to continuously provide. That's what industrial companies You know, and there's many other industrial companies here that we've talked to. That's what industrial companies are good at, right?
It's not about us moving towards smart refrigerators that tell us about, beer consumption, etc. It's really about choice. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to build is a matter of choice. You can choose to, buy that smart refrigerator with the beer, data or consumption, or you can choose to not do that. It's entirely up to you. But if you don't have the choice to do that, that is our concern. And that's what we're talking about, digital divide and equity issues. There is a portion of the population, or a portion in our sector that aren't given that infrastructure choice to be allowed to move forward towards their quality of life, towards their economic development. And it's up to the city, along with its stakeholders, to provide that infrastructure to allow people to move forward, if they should want to.
So one thing that we have found ourselves, sort of fixated on is this situation in Boston where we're going to hit potentially 700,000 people by 2030. And that's going to mean that we need to build 53,000 new units of housing. I'm going to walk you through a little journey here. So we have this growth that is upon us. We have a situation where our current building stock is, doing, okay as far as broadband readiness, but there are, far too many examples of basically MDU lockdown. You guys kind of know what I mean by that. So
MDUs, everybody, who else wants to see?
So
There's a few. You have more than.
Yep. So multiple dwelling unit. You're in an apartment building, and you learn you only have one choice of provider. That's really bad for everyone, for the reasons Debra discussed as well. But when you're talking about how that happens, there's some behavioral and some policy things that need to be addressed. We're working on that. We are also thinking about the design of buildings. So through this process called Article 80, under what was prior to yesterday the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and as of yesterday is the Boston Planning and Development Agency. It's very exciting. It actually is very exciting. I'm happy to get into that later. We're saying, all right, the development process is very long. It's long and expensive. But what would it look like if you were to start talking about, the type of wiring, the way your points of entry are set up, the way your telco closet is set up, the size and position of these, in the building. How do you look at that stuff as an opportunity to get, higher capacity into both commercial and residential buildings, of course, but also as a way to, before that building opens, before you make a call to the one telco provider who you're just used to working with because you're, in a city that prior to now has not had a lot of choice. What if you were to learn about the range of options you have that could really actually make your building a place that serves residents' needs? So look out for us rolling that out in probably October.
Yeah, Craig, you talked about a couple things that I think are kind of interesting. That one of them is what I like to call crowd government. So, we talk a lot about sensors and different things being placed out by the city and then gathering the data. But we're seeing more and more scenarios where, a personal smartphone, which has all these different tools inside of it, grab data, and if you're willing to share that aggregation of data becomes very important. I mean, you look at Waze, right? The transportation app that is crowdsourced, that is extremely accurate for the most part. I mean, it has a few flaws, but extremely accurate. If if everyone had a smart device that had a thermometer on it, I would know in all different, and it has the GPS coordinates right now. I know throughout the city all that stuff versus me having to install sensors throughout the whole city. And so there's so many things that I think with broadband open up an avenue for crowd government, which, because at the end of the day, I have a 10 and 12-year-old. What I'd love to see from them is a government that they can look at to where they want to be a part of and they want to be involved with, versus like most of us experiencing government are very reluctant to consume. And somehow that's our role now, that we need to be thinking of the things as we look forward to be that. And your similar talk about a smart refrigerator, right? Right now it seems a little bit quirky and it's like somewhat overkill. But if that refrigerator could tell you the things that are in your refrigerator that are out of date, that may harm your health, and if there was a pattern that you could program or it would understand to your consumption of eggs or milk or different things, and pre-order it for you, have your shopping list ready for you in advance, and aggregating something like Shipt and other grocery type of services that bring it to your house. That holistic ecosystem is now realistic to people, and it saves them time, things stay fresher, and so you start adding all these other things on top of it that are getting developed. You see this convergence of the value in it. And some of them, they're early and advanced, but it takes some of that stuff to spark someone's creativity to say, okay, well, let's take this, we add this next piece, we bring them together, and now you have this very beneficial solution that we can enjoy. And a lot of this is going to have to do with high-end broadband. And so I just wanted to touch on a couple things.
Interesting was the other inspiration. I was talking to the mayor of Liverpool, which anyone my age says, this is the coolest thing. And we do a project around, these poor guys and blah, blah, blah. But actually what he wanted to do is come up with a smart city project around the food supply. He really thought that out of the digital divide, of all the places to attack, would be providing better ways of managing the food supply within the city. That this out of anything, let's go after that.
And eliminate the hungry and various different things.